Welcome to the Mary Mac Show, where we will be talking about your feelings, experiences, and pain following the death of a loved one. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you find yourself in this entire world, I welcome you. Today, I'd like to speak with you about the death of a sibling, our sister, brother, stepsister, or stepbrother. If you've experienced the death of an adult sibling, do give yourself permission to fully grieve for your loved one. You may have had quarrels during your younger years, perhaps even during adulthood, but most of us don't expect our siblings to die young, and definitely not before our parents. We aren't prepared for their deaths, especially if we are close in age. We grew up together and expect to enjoy our latter years together. It's never been a thought for us. But sometimes we are thrown when they die to illness or accident, even a violent death like homicide or suicide, long before we believe it should be their time. And trying to comprehend all this will be based upon whether we've lived through other deaths, the relationship we had with them, whether it was close or aloof, whether we spent a good deal of our time together as children and in adulthood, whether you shared similar life experiences, got together with each other's families, confided in each other, even whether you lived near one another geographically. Sometimes you feel like you don't have the right to grieve the death of your sister or brother. People at work or friends of yours may say things like, "You need to get on with your life. After all, it was only your brother, only your sister who died." People can be quite insensitive. For some, losing a brother or sister was an irreplaceable loss, since the relationship you shared was so deep. You might have talked to each other, maybe even daily, knew everything about each other's lives, was there for each other when each of you needed emotional support during trying times, were the ones who dropped everything when the other needed a friend. Maybe you raised your families together, had children in the same age range, went on family vacations together, even played sports together. I know a good friend of mine, my friend Debbie, whom I've known since I was in 7th grade. She would go away with her entire family for a week each summer to a cabin by a lake. They could always look forward to spending that time together and just rest, relax, and have fun. To this day, all her family, now with children and grandchildren, visit each summer for a week to vacation together, slow down, spend time, and share wonderful memories. I remember thinking how blessed they were when I was growing up and was so close to Debbie. Her family planned a week away each year without fail, and everyone knew the dates so they could plan accordingly. I just loved that. Additionally, you might be made to feel that you don't have the right to mourn to the same degree as his or her spouse. After all, they are looked upon as the one who is really entitled to grieve their death. Well, that's nonsense. You are just as entitled to your grief and loss as any other individual who loved your brother or sister. They were a part of your life long before they met their spouse, so the longevity of your relationship and the way you interacted was much different than the relationship they had with their spouse and children. And while you are grieving the death of your brother or sister, your spouse, who may have had a magnificent relationship with them, will also be grieving, as are your children who just lost their aunt or uncle, maybe their favorite one. So please remember that there are many other family members who are grieving, all at the same time, but in different ways. Don't lose sight of that. Give everyone affected some time and space to feel their pain and process it, especially young children and teens. Even your parents, who never expected to lose a child, are devastated too. No parent ever thinks they will live through the death of a son or daughter. And your grandparents, who are now overwhelmed that their own children are grieving the loss of their child and they have lost their grandchild. But this happens more than you might think, and your parents will have a very difficult time processing their loss. You might find yourself somewhat invisible in their eyes because they are so consumed with the grief for your sibling. Please realize that everyone in the family will grieve differently. So don't ever feel you need to compete for your parents' love. They are just overwhelmed with the death of their child. You might also have feelings of guilt, anger, bitterness for what should have happened between you and your sister or brother and never did, or what did happen that should never have happened. There are so many emotions that occur over a lifetime. Most good, some not so good, and some downright horrible. Fights and feuds and divisions for so many reasons. And if all of that was still going on when they died or were killed, you might have guilt left over. You might have anger left over. And you might feel a bitterness from something unresolved. You might feel guilt that you should have died first. After all, you are older. Or she or he were the kinder one in the family. Or that you should have been a better sister or brother to them. Or the rivalry you had between you since childhood, which never truly let itself go and still weaved itself through your adult relationship, makes you feel guilty still. You might also feel a great deal of anger for so many things. Anger at how they lived their life, which might have led to their death. Reckless driving, drugs, drinking, or other acts that didn't help them. Hanging out with the wrong crowd. Anger at God for not healing them of a serious illness. Anger at yourself because you always said you'd visit them more and never did. Anger that they left you so soon. A sense of abandonment because you expected them to grow old with you. All of that will need to be worked through. None of it will be resolved now. But what you can do is write a very long letter to them with all the good, bad, and the ugly and bury it at their gravesite. Now you need to take your time writing this. You'll need to let that letter sit at your bedside for a long time until you feel that you've exhausted yourself of all those horrible feelings and gotten them all down on paper. Only then will you sign and bury it. And then you'll have to leave all that behind because carrying it around in your head like a broken record will do you no good at all. One of the most difficult things to deal with when our sibling dies is to realize our own mortality and the fact that they will not grow old with us. We will not have them around to count on, to share holidays and special occasions like weddings, the birth of children, graduations, and more. The ability to count on them to help in the latter days of your parents' lives. If your brother has died, leaving small children, who will walk their daughter down the aisle? Who will pay for their education? Who will help with expenses to raise their children? Who will be there for his wife who has lost his income? There is so much to consider after a sibling's death, in addition to your grief. One of the most important ways to remember them is to keep their memory alive. You might want to continue your practice of bringing their children and your children to the baseball games you all loved. Maybe it's visiting the gravesite together, bringing flowers and hand-painted cards and notes that the children have made. Placing a flower at their seat at family dinners. Saying their name out loud regularly when you're telling remember when stories about them. Go through your photos and have the best ones printed up and framed into a photo album or a collage of frames in one of your rooms or along the staircase in your home. If you have videos, share them with family and friends. These are especially important for the youngest children who might not remember your brother or sister, and you can share stories with them when they get older. There is no doubt that you will feel intense grief after their death, and based upon the relationship you shared, will determine the longevity of that pain. Remember, we grieve so deeply because we loved so deeply. A brother or sister's love is something we held in our hearts for almost all of our lives. We were raised together, played together, ate together, learned together, and maybe even fought together. And whether we got along, most times they were our closest friends. So when we lose them, whether through expected illness or sudden accident or violence, their death pierces our heart and soul. There is now one less sibling in our family, and somehow we cannot comprehend that. Our family will never be complete again. But as we move forward through both good and bad days, we will remember them. We will honor their memories with those who survived them. We will feel blessed they were a part of our lives. We will get to celebrate all that they were to us. So now it's time to get up and dance, dance, dance. And I know you still think this is really silly, but please just do it for me anyway, okay? Thank you so much for listening in today, and share my podcast with those who may benefit from this knowledge. Remember to write 5 things in your journal each night that you are grateful for. It would mean so much to me if you would subscribe to my podcast and rate and review it at www.themarymacshow.com. Sign up for my private email list there so we can stay in touch, as social media is so unpredictable these days. And as always, remember to be happy because you deserve to. I'll speak with you again soon.